everyone. We're so grateful that you're all here, and it makes my heart so full to see so many people here today who want to learn how to use their voice at the state level. You're all presumably here because you have an inkling that being a political animal is really important to the animals. So today we hopefully will give you a little bit of a preview of why it's important to use your voice at the state level, and tell the story of Texas Pets Alive, which is a perfect example of how you can also do this in your own city, in your own state. So with that, we will start with Ryan, and he is standing in for Lori, who is our board president and very sick. So we really appreciate him being here.
That's all right. My name is Ryan Clinton. As some of you know, if you went to some of the sessions yesterday, I'm an attorney here in Austin, and I've been part of the no-kill movement in Austin from the beginning. One of my organizations, and in fact, what I think that I helped bring to the Austin animal welfare movement was political organizing, because I believed from the beginning that if we were going to change animal welfare in Austin for the benefit of the animals, and then we needed to affect that change through the political actors who enforce those changes. And so I founded an organization back in the mid-2000s to do that in Austin locally, and through the many years of our advocacy, we were ultimately successful in that, which was amazing. But one of the things that we didn't realize was that we were going to continue to face challenges. It never got to a place, and I don't know that it ever will be at a place where we will not continue to face challenges. And so one of the challenges that we faced that came out of left field, honestly, was that the Texas Board of Veterinary Medical, TBVME, Medical Examiners, which is the licensing agency for veterinarians in Austin, in Texas, statewide. It's a state agency, decided that they were going to put an end to the no-kill movement, and that they were going to put an end to it by essentially shutting down the provision of medical care in animal shelters. So we were shocked. We had no idea that there were these actors out there who had the ability to stop us, which they did, who were going to do everything they could to stop us. So the state agency worked with the Veterinary Medical Association, which is a private organization of veterinarians, to come up with a bill that in appearance appeared to help shelter pets, but in reality actually made it incredibly difficult for shelters to provide medicine. And I'm talking about vaccines, I'm talking about spay-neuter, I'm talking about care for animals that are hurt, even just medicine to make them feel better if they're hurt, to delay any medical decisions. They wanted to put an end to it. So they got together, those two organizations, and got a bill proposed at the legislature with multiple sponsors to do that, under the guise of making it easier to provide medical care. They were actually making it almost impossible to do so. And so we were not completely prepared for that, just to be perfectly honest with you. We had not done that. We had not organized at that level. So Dr. Jefferson and I spent days and days and days walking the hallways at the Texas legislature down the street, knocking on doors, talking to everybody that we could. I'm a lawyer as a profession. I don't do animal welfare work predominantly, with some exceptions. I don't do it as part of my profession. And so I was taking off work. I probably missed 2 weeks of work going to the legislature trying to stop the bill, and ultimately we did. And then 2 years later it came back. We have a legislature that works every other year. 2 years later the same bill came back. And I couldn't put in the effort, but Dr. Jefferson and Laurie Michelle and Larry Tucker, who's not here, all had to do the same thing, take off days and days of work, knock on doors, talk to people, and again, it didn't advance, but it was an incredibly difficult process for people that were not professionals at doing that. I should say Laurie Michelle is pretty professional at a lot of things, and she had a lot more experience with lobbying the legislature, which is why she was so perfect for this position that I'm trying to stand in for. She's far more knowledgeable about it than I am, as are these two, which is why I'm going to turn it over to them shortly. But we took a step back and said, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep just having a few non-professionals at this, taking a couple weeks off of their personal time to stop bills. We have to be more strategic than this. And so a group of the people, Lori Michelle, Larry Tucker, and several others, got together and founded Texas Pets Alive, which is essentially a statewide advocacy organization on behalf of the no-kill movement. So we wanted to be the voice of no-kill sheltering at the Texas legislature. And I'm going to turn it over to these two, but I want to say before I do turn it over, that these two women are the examples of why I think this conference is so special, which is that we do not create experts and then put them in front of you. We don't create experts by putting them on a tour, to give speeches. We actually do it the opposite way. We go find the experts who are already amazing at this, and then we, fortunately, in these two examples and several others, they're willing to come speak. And so Laura was already doing this in Virginia. We're very, very lucky to have her now as part of Austin Pets Alive and American Pets Alive. Katie has been a force, an absolute force at the Texas legislature. And if anybody is watching this out on the internet, you will make a major mistake if you ever think that you're going to get past these two. They are really, really strong, powerful agents on behalf of animals, and I'm really proud to have them here. So I hope that you guys will join me real quick in applauding and thanking them for being here.
That is very sweet. So I just have this slide up here just to show, I know if Lori were here, she would talk about the fact that Texas Pets Alive is happy to come to you if you need any help or technical assistance in trying to figure out how to navigate talking to your local elected officials. This organization is here to support you, and definitely encourage you to sign up on the website for action alerts and such. But although we're really working at the state capitol, we know that all politics are local, so please don't hesitate to contact us. So I thought I would talk a little bit about the difference between a C3, a C4, and a political action committee. I just thought maybe I should ask the question, how many in here think that if you are a 501c3 nonprofit that you are prohibited from lobbying? Who thinks that? Be brave. We have a few people.
I used to think that.
Yeah, I mean, right. So I'm here to tell you, the good news is that is not true. And actually, those that are working in the crisis, which is all of you here today, you are working in the crisis. No one knows better long-term policy solutions for the problems that we are facing than you. So quite the contrary, we all have truly almost a moral and ethical obligation, those of us working in the crisis, to share that with the people who are in a position to create solutions and make decisions. So all of you have an absolute right to lobby, to speak up, and to use your voice. Now, of course, if you are working for a taxpayer-funded shelter, there are some different regulations, but fortunately, we got through last session, and cities still have lobbyists to represent them. Thank goodness. So there was an effort to repeal that. But cities have a voice at the table. Counties have a voice at the table. So city, whether you're taxpayer funded or not, you should be a part of the policy-making process. And you've heard if you're not at the seat, you're probably on the menu. If you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu, but that's very true. So please do use your voice. Now, that said, the 501c3 status, that section of the statute was established to encourage the private industry to get involved with social welfare issues, understanding that the government couldn't pay for and work in the crisis all on its own. And so, of course, the C3 status was established to stimulate the private economy to help with social services. And so, as such, you get a tax exemption, both income and expense exemption, if you say to the government, I am a not-for-profit, none of this is for profit, and this is all for social welfare. If you get a tax credit for both of those things, then you must be primarily working in the crisis. You must be a social welfare response organization working in the crisis. So the majority of what you do can't be lobbying. However, it just can't be the majority. So you absolutely can and should lobby. And I know there's other kind of rules around how much you can spend if you are a C3, and so we could do like a whole nother session on that, and I won't bore you with those details today. But please come grab my card afterwards if you're curious and want to learn more. I can absolutely give you some really great resources. There's an amazing organization that's called Boulder Advocacy, and you can look them up, and their entire mission is to help 501c3s understand how they can lobby and use their voice and what the regulations are around that. And they have attorneys that free of cost will do a training for your board and give you technical assistance. So please don't ever hesitate if you're a 501c3 to lobby. You can and you should. However, it has to be a minimus of your mission, right? It can't be a majority of your expenses. However, there is a place for that, and that is the 501c4. A 501c4 is still a nonprofit organization, and their expenses can be tax deductible because the government recognizes, okay, you are still working for the social good, you are helping on policy solutions around a crisis, but you're not delivering services. So we're going to give you half of those tax benefits. So your expenses can be tax deductible, but your income cannot. So if you're a 501c4, so any donations to Texas Pets Alive would not be tax deductible. You can't take that off. Much like a political campaign, you couldn't take that off. However, the expenses are tax deductible, and it is a nonprofit. But the primary mission of a C4 is to lobby, is to use its political voice. And good news is, for those of you that have set up C3 rescues and worked on C3s, because you're not getting a tax break on the income side, the regulations are far fewer. So you too can set up a C4. It's really not that difficult. Also happy to help you do that. Holler at me after this if you're curious. So the primary mission of Texas Pets Alive is to lobby, and as such, it can lobby unlimited. It does not need to track its expenses. It does not need to hold back. It can unapologetically be the voice. And so that's the one thing that all of you here should know, is that you do have a voice at the Texas Capitol, all of you. And Texas Pets Alive is here to advocate for you. So please don't hesitate to know that you can just join that movement. But all of us need to be a part. So there's another leg of the stool, three-legged chair, if you will, and that is the Political Action Committee. So political action committees are entities, in Texas Pets Alive case, we'll use that as our case example. It is registered with the state, so it is not registered with the FEC, the Federal Ethics Commission. It's registered with the Texas Ethics Commission. So the Texas Pets Alive PAC only works on state races, not at the federal level, not Congress. But that organization, the mission of that organization is to ensure that that we educate and we advance legislators. We get elected legislators who want to protect the mission of saving animals' lives. So it's one thing to say, okay, I'm gonna participate in an education process. I'm going to go to the Capitol and I'm going to educate the members that are here about these issues and why they're important. But it's a far nother to say, okay, I'm not just gonna show up in January at the Capitol. I'm gonna show up in November, and I'm going to make this issue one that politicians talk about. I'm going to ask what their stance is. And if they don't support our mission, then we will not support their candidacy. A PAC does something that nonprofits cannot do. So if you're a C3 or a C4, you're a registered nonprofit. You can lobby, but you cannot in any way participate in the elections of a candidate. So if you just think about it this way, you have nonprofits can work at the Capitol during the legislative session, and political action committees can work at elections. So those are the two spaces, and that's why each entity can be really critical. And in fact, this is nothing new for any other corporate interest, right? So every corporate interest has these three-legged stools. So just so everyone understands, there are different vehicles, but they're all important because candidates or legislators really pay attention when they know that you're not just going to show up and ask for them to do something when they're already elected, but that you're going to make it an issue at the ballot box. So hopefully all of you heard Ryan's story about why Texas Pets Alive started and can understand why we all need to be using our statewide voice. But just in this last legislative session, there are a couple examples that you may or may not have heard about. And some of these are, some elected officials, they are really well-intentioned. They have a personal experience, and in lieu of not being educated by you, the experts, on how shelters and rescues operate, they come up with their own solutions. And there was one bill that was very well-meaning by a representative in Texas that required that an animal shelter would provide written notice to each person who adopts an animal from the shelter of any epizootic infectious disease that occurs within 30 days of that adoption occurring, before or after the adoption. Now, we're all here because we save those who need saving the most, right? So those are the parvo puppies, distemper, ringworm, Felvie, right? All these animals. Can you imagine? I mean, just keep the copy machine going. I mean, it would be an endless notice of yes, we have animals that have diseases. We're treating them. You've all heard the organizations like Austin Pets Alive that has an 85% success rate in treating parvo puppies. But can you imagine what that would do even to the public to be constantly sending out notices? It was just, well-intentioned. He had a personal experience. He adopted an animal that was sick, and he didn't know it was sick. And so, you can kind of understand. But this bill actually passed the House and just ran out of steam in the Senate. But so this is an example of how really well-intentioned but really bad ideas can actually be passed into law if you are not there to have a voice. I think everybody heard about this bill if you live in Texas, House Bill 3806. I would like to say that this bill was well-intentioned, but I'm not sure that it was. However, no fear, this bill did not get anywhere close to passing thanks to the incredible, outrageous, response, rightly so, by the community who was really, really offended. But again, this came from a for-profit veterinarian who apparently thought that low-cost and shelter veterinary medicine was a threat to his pocketbook and his practice, and wanted to see the end of low-cost veterinary care. So that was a pretty shocking and appalling bill. And thankfully, because of the strength of the animal movement here in Texas, everyone united and really used their voice. But this is just another example of why everyone needs to be involved, and frankly, why Texas Pets Alive is now in existence.
Can I say something quick about that one?
Please do.
On that bill, I just wanted to note that this is an example of the difference between those of us who are not professionals and those who are professionals at this. There were a lot of games played on the day that the testimony was heard. And so to push all of the animal advocates to leave for the day, another bill about bees got heard for hours and hours and hours, and the testimony was unlimited. People could speak as long as they wanted. It went on and on and on as this bill got pushed into the night. And then when it finally came up
at 10 p.m.,
the legislator in charge of the meeting said, don't say anything that somebody else has said, only a few of you can talk, and you're limited to 1 minute, or whatever it was. And so it was for those of us who are not professional, times at that. That gamesmanship was incredibly frustrating, and it's kind of an example of why it really helps to have people like these two women on your team, that they've been through it. It doesn't bother them. They get it. I mean, maybe it'll piss them off, but like they've been there before, right? They've been there before. They've seen it before. They've done it before. They've had it done to them before. It's not going to throw them off their game. Whereas people like me, it was really frustrating.
I will say I did have a marathon 14-hour hearing when I was in Virginia. They tried to smoke me out, and I was like, not going home. Yeah. I was the last person. It was like 11:55 at night. I was like, still here, still speaking. But yes, they do. There's lots of trickeries and games afoot, but nothing can beat an organized mass of passionate, committed people. Nothing. Because at the end of the day, no matter, like, all the dollars in the world don't walk into a ballot box and vote. And every legislator wants one thing, unless they're retiring, and that is to stay in power. They want to stay in power, right? And so maybe they perceive that big PAC donations might help them finance their campaign. But at the end of the day, a legislator is there providing public service because they believe that they are the best person to do that, and they want to stay in that position of influence. And so if they think that you are speaking on behalf of dozens and dozens and dozens of their constituents, they will listen. So you do not need to feel like you need to have some sort of powerful PAC behind you or otherwise. And I think the demise of that bill showed that.
Yes, it was a good one. You should definitely go back and watch the hearing. It was a good one to
Katie,
watch.
I don't know if you also want to mention the Representative White's bill. That was another doozy.
Yeah, I definitely will. But I just want to first introduce myself for a second. My name is Katie Jarl. I'm with the Humane Society of the United States. I'm actually the regional director, and I now oversee 10 states, so the chances are I probably work in a lot of your states here in the room, and I'd love to talk with you and point you in the right direction if you are looking to get more involved in your state house. Thank you all so much. It really is encouraging because I know many of you got into this work so that you could have hands-on experiences with animals. You really love animals. You love going into the shelter. You love the rescue work you're doing. Your idea of a good time isn't sitting in a hearing room for 12 hours, and so I really do appreciate that all of you are here today, because the Humane Society of the United States was actually founded by a group of shelter directors who realized that there was a root cause of some of the problems that were happening around animals in our society, and we wanted to form an organization that focused on the policy issues and helped alleviate some of the concerns that we were seeing around animal cruelty and other issues in and around the country. And we understand that you all do, like Ryan, you have day jobs. You have other things that you have to go and do every single day, and you don't always have time to stay on top of everything. The Humane Society does have a state director, so somebody who is at the Capitol every single day in every single one of your states, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with that person in your state. If you don't know who they are, they keep up with bills, they keep up with tracking, they can let you know about hearings coming up, they can share testimony drafts with you, and that's really exactly what they're there to do. They're there to interact with the animal community in their state to make sure they're plugged in. Which really leads into one of the first, points that I really want to talk about, and that's coalition building and how important it is that we work together. Our opposition, the people that are either introducing bad bills or those people that are introducing bills that go against our own interests, they are organized. They have a lot of people that show up, and they are working together and sending out e-blasts and news articles and all kinds of stuff, all kinds of things to try to make sure that they are represented at the Capitol. Oftentimes, the people on the other side are private veterinarians who have put in a lot of money to hire a lobbyist. They are private exotic animal owners who have come together to hire big-time lobbyists to go up there and fight legislation. It was really interesting. I was just in Kansas a couple weeks ago, and I attended our Kansas Humane Lobby Day, and there were all of these shelters and rescues from all over the state of Kansas there to talk about how we can end greyhound racing in Kansas. It's a really big issue there. And we found out that the greyhound racing tracks in Kansas had pooled their money together, and they had a team of 12 lobbyists working up at the Capitol to ensure that greyhound racing would thrive in the state of Kansas. And I look over and we have like our scrappy team, and it's one person who's worked with us for 20 years, and she's sitting there talking about her plan. And you know what? I remember thinking that day, like, we are really up against it. I mean, if it had not been for this room full of advocates, we would have a big problem today. And we walked away thinking, well, it's a long shot, but I'm happy to say the hearing for that bill was this week, and greyhound racing was not included in that racing bill. And it just goes to show that when you have a group of committed and united citizens that have come together for a cause, you really can beat the other side. It doesn't matter how much money they have or how many lobbyists, it really does take us coming together. And coalition building is really great because it doesn't necessarily have to be all of the obvious choices, all of the obvious people, the people sitting at your table, other animal welfare groups. You know, one of my favorite stories to tell is we had a bill a couple years ago to ban shark finning in the state of Texas. And of course, we had all of the obvious animal welfare groups involved. We had Oceana and environmental groups, but we did not get taken seriously until we brought leaders from the seafood industry, from the Texas seafood industry, decided to join our coalition because their argument was that if we eliminate all of the sharks from the Texas Gulf Coast, that is going to affect the seafood population. That's going to affect our bottom line in our business. And so therefore, we basically went, and sat next to people from the seafood industry in order to get this shark fin bill passed. So some of the allies that are going to work with you on these issues might be law enforcement. They might be local businesses. And so really think about who would join your coalition, who would be part of working with you, and it really is so much more impactful to go to legislators as a team, as a coalition, than it is individually.
Katie, can I chime in there for a second?
Yeah.
An example of that, in the issue that we had with the Veterinary Medical Association, the issue was about what was required and what the requirements were going to be to provide medicine to animals. And it was actually a legal case first. It was the veterinary board attempted to stop a veterinarian, Dr. Jefferson, from practicing medicine at shelters. They picked it was like when you're in the schoolyard, if you want to be in charge, you pick the biggest one and you hit him in the face. That's what they were trying to do, right? Pick the biggest member of the no-kill movement and shut her down, and that would send a message to everybody else. And so pro bono, we took on that case. My firm and another firm took on that case, and we sued the veterinary board. And we kept on winning and kept on winning and kept on winning, and they kept on appealing or kept on fighting. And after about 2.5 years, maybe 3 years, on the eve of oral argument at the Austin Court of Appeals, they gave up. But interestingly, talking about coalition building, we got in legal terms that we call it getting amicus support, which is you get other organizations to file a brief on your behalf, telling the court, we agree with this side. And you should do this in any case that you're involved in. So we went and we got organizations, and of course it was easy to get animal welfare organizations. So like Best Friends put in an amicus brief on the side of Dr. Jefferson. But I went to the Texas Farm Bureau because farmers provide medical care to their own animals. And the position that the veterinary board was taking would have negatively impacted farmers too, because they would not have been able to provide vaccines to their own farm animals. So we went to the Farm Bureau, and the Farm Bureau took our side in the litigation. And so keep in mind, I think that's a great point.
Yes.
Just because they might not be with you on one issue doesn't mean they're not going to be with you on another. And I'm sure there are plenty of examples of where the Farm Bureau would not have been on our side. But don't be afraid to go to them, because that was a big issue for them. They did not want to make it really hard for their farmers to be able to give vaccines to their own animals.
That is a perfect point. I mean, it's a really great example because he's right. I mean, when you can come to a legislator and say the animal welfare movement the Farm Bureau, the seafood industry, law enforcement, and municipalities are all behind this, and then these are the individuals that are not. I mean, that sends a message to those legislators that if all of these people that don't usually agree on things think that this is the way to go, and this is just one fringe group of people are very much saying that this is not what they want, that speaks volumes. And I love that example. So these are just a few practical tips when you are getting ready for the legislative session. So many of your states are probably in legislative sessions right now and are working through the process. Here in the state of Texas, as Ryan mentioned, we only meet every other year. So on odd numbered years, and if you were at the Texas legislature for those odd numbered years, you'd know why we need a 1-year break in between. But these are just a few tips as you're preparing to go into the next legislative session that I think a lot of people don't take into account. The one thing I see time and time again, especially with smaller shelters and rescues when we're up at the Capitol, is that they wait until the session has started to begin to plan their strategy and really get moving on things. And these are a list of things you can actually do prior to session starting. You can start working on these things right now to make sure that when the session starts, you are ahead of the game and you're ready to go, because once session starts, it moves very, very quickly. And so one of the most important things is obviously to draft your legislation. You would think that that's, an obvious thing, but there are a lot of people it will be March and April, and they're still sending drafts of things to Leg Council. They're still sending drafts to other animal organizations. They're sending it amongst themselves, and there's no agreement on what that piece of legislation should look like. And so best practice is to start writing the legislation the way that you want it to look and start circulating it now. Once you have those coalition members, once you have those like-minded individuals that care about that issue, make sure that you have a really smart attorney that's willing to take a look at it, or you have some other people that are willing to weigh in or do some research on what laws and how they've been written in other states where they've been really successful. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can really look at some other really good examples of legislation in other states and take those. But it's really helpful when you're looking for a sponsor for your bill to already have something in place to show them what you want. It really professionalizes you. Obviously, the next step would be you can identify a sponsor early on. Sometimes, especially if you're a local group and you're really close with your local senator or representative, that's a very obvious choice. And that's one of the reasons it's so critically important that you get to know who your state representative and state senator are, because you want them to come to you and talk to you as the expert in your community on animal issues. If something comes up, you want them to call and say, hey, Katie, a group just came into my office. They're talking about doing this bill about veterinary medicine. I know that you care a lot about shelters and rescues. Can I send this to you, or can one of my staff members come talk to you about how you would feel about this? You want to have that close of a relationship with your legislative office so that you know what they're thinking. But also when it comes to identifying a sponsor, if you are close with your state senator or your state representative, they may tell you, hey, look, this bill is going to go to the Public Health Committee. I'm not on public health, but I'll tell you a couple people who are on the Public Health Committee that might be really good sponsors, and that you should definitely go talk to them in advance and make sure you have their buy-in. That saves you so much time. It makes those legislators see you as a complete professional. Like, you've come to them ahead of time, you know what committees they're on, you know what influence they have. That is going to carry a lot of weight. I already mentioned sharing your draft with stakeholders and coalition members. Like I said, there's people like Ryan. I'm sure our organization has a legal department that is always happy to review drafts of any legislation, show you what's happened in other states, give you some comparable information. Introducing yourself to legislators, presenting yourself as a resource to them. That's something that kind of happens throughout the legislative session, but certainly, a lot of them, especially leading up to November, are having town halls in your areas right now because they are running for re-election. So now is the time to follow your state senator and your state representative on Facebook, on social media, find out when they're going to be holding those town hall events, and when they say, I'm here because I want to earn your vote, raise your hand and say, where do you stand on animal welfare issues? I'm a member of this local rescue group. This is an issue that's important to me. If elected, are you going to be something? Put them on the spot. Have them answer those questions in a public setting. And I also want to say it's really amazing right now because I don't know how closely you all follow the presidential nominee platforms. I'm sure that's something you're all looking at on the side on the weekends. But we have, during this election cycle, we have had 4 presidential candidates release what they would do, release a platform on animal welfare issues. That is amazing. Can I just tell you that if you had asked me 10 years ago if presidential candidates would have been putting forth their animal welfare platforms, I would have been like, we are not even close to that. So the fact that we have candidates that are not only putting out those platforms, but they're actually talking about the issues surrounding animal welfare. Laura pointed out to me earlier today, Mike Bloomberg, I'm not getting political, but Mike Bloomberg actually has an ad running saying about how low the euthanasia rates were in New York after he took over as mayor, and if you're a dog lover, sign up to get Mike's emails. And I thought to myself, we have arrived.
And that is the second presidential candidate who ran on no-kill. That is the second.
Yeah.
So we have 2 presidential candidates running on no-kill. I mean, 10 years ago, this movement didn't exist. And the people in the room are pushing it, and all of a sudden 2 presidential candidates are putting it on their platform as the reasons to vote for them. I mean, it's just incredible.
It's incredible, and it really is. So having, when you're talking to your legislator, you could even say, and again, I'm just using an example, but you could say, Representative, I know you're running for re-election. I don't know if you've had a chance to see Julian Castro's platform on animal welfare, but I have a copy of it right here. It's very strong, and I'd like to see, something in writing from you. What are your stances on animal issues? What votes have you taken? How have you made animal welfare a priority in the past? If you're running, how do you expect that will look in your, when you're elected? And it's really cool because I have to say I've attended several of these meetings, and even if you're in a room with other people who came for different reasons, you'd be surprised how many people are like, oh yeah, what are you going to do about that? I mean, people genuinely like talking about animals, and then everyone has a story about their own dog that they adopted, and immediately these legislators are like, oh my gosh, okay, well, this is something that really makes people happy and brings them together. I should pay attention to this issue. One is to create a mission statement, 1-pager, to show them who you are and what your issue is all about. I say this because when you are meeting with legislators, you don't always get 20, 30 minutes to sit down and have these lengthy conversations with them. And so sometimes you're even coming into their office and you're meeting with a staff member, but it's always nice to have something to leave behind about your organization. Make sure it has your contact information on it. Make sure it has something about you. I'll tell you, I was just at another conference and someone brought this up. Somebody said that the most effective thing they've done on their 1-pagers is list how many social media followers that they have. And so they put a box on their 1-pager that says, the Humane Society of Kansas City has 450,000 followers on Facebook. When a legislator sees something like that, they're like, this is something in my community that where 450,000 people are following them, that they have that kind of influence. That's incredible. Make sure that your legislators have something, to show exactly how many people in the community have your support. And then this is kind of a little checklist of things that that are great to do during the legislative session. One is just being present as much as you can. And again, Ryan, gave a really great example earlier. I know not everyone can take off. Not everyone can sit up at the Capitol until 10, 11 o'clock at night, and it's totally reasonable. But if you do get off work and you are able to go and sit in on an evening hearing, I promise you will not be bored. At least I hope not. It's very interesting sitting around and kind of hearing what the state is working on and how they're passing laws to impact your life and the debate on all of those issues and really being a part of it. One of them is tracking legislation and staying on top of it. I guarantee you, every single one of you in your states, you will have something. Here in Texas, it's called Texas Legislature Online, but everyone has kind of a Capitol-based website, and those websites you can actually go on, create issue-specific checklists, and they'll email you every single time a bill comes up. So in Texas, before the legislative session starts, I go in, and I select animals, wildlife, all kinds of issue-specific things that I'm interested in. And every time that there's any movement on a bill involving those things, I get an alert from the Texas Legislature online so that I know that a hearing is coming up and I can just stay on top of it. Participating in a legislative advocacy day. Laura just showed you a picture of the No-Kill Advocacy Day with one of the Dean of the Senate, Senator Whitmire, who was featured on the photo that Laura showed. And there's several different animal advocacy days. We have a Humane Lobby Day up at the Capitol every legislative session too. Come and be a part of those advocacy days because we are strong when we work together. And I have to say, there are, for Moms Demand Action, when they showed up at the Capitol this session, there were probably thousands of them. You had to wait an hour to get in the door to even work that day because of how many people from Moms Demand Action show up. And every single time I met a legislator, they were like, oh my gosh, I haven't had one chance to breathe today because the Moms Demand Action people have been in my office all day. Imagine if that was the animal welfare movement that we're lining up around the Capitol and really showing how powerful and engaged and committed we are. Those advocacy days can really do much more than advance legislation. They can really show our power as a movement. One is preparing meaningful testimony. A lot of times, especially Ryan just mentioned, or Laura, one of you mentioned the veterinary medicine bill, the nonprofit vet medicine bill that was heard this legislative session. The very first thing that the chairman said is don't repeat each other's things, have something new to say. So you want to be really thoughtful, talk to those coalition members, talk to those stakeholders, make sure that you are bringing something to the table that is new so that the testimony that you're bringing is something that's coordinated and that shows a bunch of different angles, because most of the time you will only get either 1 to 3 minutes to deliver your testimony. You likely won't get to say everything you want to say in those 1 to 3 minutes. Make sure your partner has all of the things in her testimony that you didn't get to put in yours so that they really are getting the full picture. Showing up for hearings and floor votes. Oftentimes, if you will go and tell your legislator that the, Austin Pets Alive, that there's a group from Austin Pets Alive on the, in the gallery attending a floor vote. If you go tell your legislator, I guarantee you, your legislator on the floor will probably say, it's so wonderful that I have a group from my district here today from Austin Pets Alive. Welcome them to your Texas Capitol. And we just did the exact same thing in Arizona a couple weeks ago where they welcomed us to the floor and recognized us as animal advocates. And again, it's just reaffirming how engaged we are to the process. It's showing all of the other legislators on the floor that animal advocates are paying attention. Organize that legislative advocacy day if there's not one at your Capitol. Again, that's something that I know a lot of the shelters and rescues in your area would probably really love to be a part of. I'd be happy to share when our dates are if they haven't already happened and you want to be a part of the legislative advocacy day in your state. And don't give up. It oftentimes takes 1, 2, even 3 or 4 or 5 sometimes times to get it right up at the Capitol. And oftentimes the most important thing that you can do by being there, even if your bill doesn't get passed, one of the most important things you've done while you've been there is educate people. You've told countless legislators about your rescue work and the euthanasia of pets in your state that they had no idea, they didn't know anything about, and they're going to remember you into the future. So with that, that's all we have. I think, do we have time for questions?
No, I think we're all out of time.
Okay.
But I do, so just one sort of closing comment. Please, if you do nothing else from listening to this for the last 45 minutes, when you go back home, make sure that your state senator and your state representative know who you are, know what you care about, and that you are a resource. You are the expert, not the lobbyists. You are the expert, so please make sure they know what you care about and check in with them every so often. Go and make sure their staff have your card. I cannot tell you, that is the most powerful thing you can do. And if you work at a shelter or you work in rescue, please invite them to your facility. Let them see your life-saving work in action. Let them look into the eyes that we look into every single day. let them see that and feel that experience that with you. It is so very powerful. And with that, I hope everyone is going to be here tomorrow at noon. Texas Pets Alive during the lunch is going to have a brief but important award ceremony for 6 amazing lawmakers who have stuck their neck out and time again come out for us in the no-kill movement. And I hope you can be there to give them a round of applause. So I know we're out of time, but we're all here and we have cards and we're so happy to talk to you. Thank you for working in this movement. We really appreciate you.